Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Akupara Games podcast. This is probably going to be one of many episodes, and I am very delighted to be joined here today by our composer extraordinaire, Kat Arthur. Hi, Kat.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. I constantly talk about how good you are at this job, like all the time.
What do you want from me?
I am, just a little bit. Now, you might know, last week we announced the Relic Hunters Zero remix launch date for the Switch, and Relic Hunters Zero remix, which is a huge wide update to the Relic Hunters game that we all know and love for the past 5 years on PC. Part of that update is an update to the soundtrack, right? Which includes a bunch of new songs, a bunch of new music, and all of that music was composed by the illustrious Kat Arthur. I wanted to take some time to pick your brain a little bit about what went into the music making process behind Relic Hunters Zero remix. So for the next half hour, that'll be what we're
Yes,
what we're
my
talking
brain
about.
is
Are you
open
ready to
for the
go?
picking. Go ahead, get in that meaty nonsense.
Okay. So the very first time you loaded up Relic Hunters Zero, what was your immediate thought, like musically? Did you know right off the bat what you'd be aiming for, or did it take some experimentation to kind of get
So my first thought when I opened it up was like, okay, so Relic Hunters already had a soundtrack. They got some Creative Commons licensed music from the artist Go280, and that's what they used for the original. And I wanted to do something that paid homage to that in spirit, but that would also, I think, feel like I'm reluctant to say improvement because the old soundtrack does slap, and I really like how experimental it was, but I really want... Yeah,
I agree, it also
to do
slaps.
something that would be a little bit more accessible and relatable to, I think, a more general audience. So I wanted to leave behind some of the really electronic experimental stuff and focus on like stronger, more hummable melodies without getting too watered down. I still wanted to do like a lot of progressive stuff because that's just what I do. But I wanted to keep the spirit the same.
Yeah, and continue that kind of legacy forward.
So that was my main first push when I did this. Sorry, this is my first time on a podcast, so sorry if I'm a little bit stammery. This isn't new.
It's okay. This is my a gazillionth time on a podcast, and I'm also a nervous wreck. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell the listeners at home. Okay, so something that pops up in the new soundtrack is a lot of chiptune sounds, right? We published a blog a couple of weeks ago, and you talked a little bit about using, God, what was it? A Sega Genesis sound chip.
I used.
And then
I used
some
a
other
few
sound chips, right?
There's a Sega Genesis sound chip. I use a program called Plug Chip Sounds for most of it, aside from the Sega Genesis, and that'll emulate a lot of things like NES, Game Boy, Commodore 64. I'd say it's mostly NES and Commodore 64 with a little bit of Sega Genesis thrown in for flavor. I didn't want to do something that was like really strict, accurate, authentic chiptunes, like the kind of chiptunes that you could literally put on a cartridge and have it play representatively on a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis. Because the game itself is pixel art plus. Like it's at a huge resolution. It's got whatever colors they want to use. They're using pixel art, but they're not.
There's a ton of sprites on screen.
Yeah.
No SNES would be able to has the RAM for all of those enemies and stuff. And the music seems more complex, right? Like there's more melody, more harmony, more complex stuff going on kind of underneath those sort of main melodies. Like one of the things that, you know, whatever, like in Pokemon, in Game Boy or whatever, those are very simple songs at the end of the day because they only really have a couple of, you know, like they can't thread too many notes together. Whereas the remix songs are
that is
a lot
the
more
first thing I threw out was the voice limitation. I did initially, for the initial concept, try to keep a fairly strict NES sound as far as like the timbre we were going for. Like I only used chip instruments, I only used chip drums, I only used chip pads. There were a lot more voices, but it was you know, a stricter sound. And when I bounced that off the team, they said they wanted more. They didn't need to be as strict as that was. So at that point I started adding in some additional synthesizers. Actually it was the suggestion of Rogue Snail's main composer, Raphael, to get into FM8, which is a synthesizer. And so I did. And that is a good, like, third of the sounds that you hear is actually from a totally not video game synthesizer.
That makes a lot of sense. For the non-music theory nerds at home, this is mostly so I can show off. The word timbre describes kind of like the texture of a sound, right? So you could have an electric guitar or a violin could both play the same note, right? Like at the same pitch. But the way that note is created by, you know, rubbing a bowstring on a violin string or plucking a guitar is what makes timbre. That's really interesting though. That's really kind of cool and clever because I feel like there are a lot of synthesizer sounds, but they are very unique, right? It's not like it is just sort of the same sounds being repeated, even if like the melody is kind of coming back around or being kind of like echoed or mirrored in other sorts of
I don't
places,
like to be too repetitive with music that's already looping. You know, I figure like this is a roguelike, so you're gonna like go through the game a lot. You're gonna hear the same sounds, you know, same music over and over again. So I don't want within that piece to have too much repetition because the repetition will come from your exposure to those same songs over and over in the game.
Yeah, so that makes sense because there is one. So on the soundtrack, which by the way releases today, you can pick it up on Bandcamp, and it'll be live in a bunch of different places. On the soundtrack, there are 4 different tracks that are all named Asteroid Dungeon Nemesis, right? But it's part 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is the battle music, right? In that as you move through the level, you're moving through that music, or is it?
So each one of those songs corresponds to one level. So in between levels, they go back to the spaceship. They go back to Space Heart, and then they go back down to the asteroid, which is named Asteroid Dungeon Nemesis. And there's not like. It's not like, you know, there's a jungle atmosphere and then an underwater atmosphere. They're mostly varied in like their enemy layout and the obstacle layout and everything. But there wasn't much to latch on to as far as like environmental themes. So
one of them is yellow and then the next one is blue. Like that. I don't think that's I don't think that's enough to go on to make different.
So I named them that way actually because as this soundtrack developed more, it was clear what the team wanted to hear was more progressive rock. So the first song that I made was the level 1 music, but after that it became more and more progressive, and I named it like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 in Roman numerals because that's a lot of the times the way you see multi-part songs broken up on progressive rock albums, on Rush, on Dream Theater, you know, when they have, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, all those movements are broken up in tracks and also on the liner notes with Roman numerals. Yes. Words.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like that's like a big, inspiration, right? Like, so something that you mentioned in the blog, for instance, is this thing called quote unquote Iron Maiden harmonization. Can you break down what that is and why you used it here? I love Iron Maiden.
Okay.
So I was very interested in
So
that
all I mean
specific
by
concept.
Iron Maiden harmonization is I'm just saying it's harmonizing the melody in diatonic thirds, which is a thing that Iron Maiden will typically do between two guitars. So for the non-music theory nerds out there, all that means is if one, I guess it's still kind of music theory-ish. If one guitar plays a note, the backup guitar will play a note 2 scale degrees lower, and they'll just move that same interval through the.
But they're moving through the exact same melody, right? It's just one is at the lower by a third. Interesting.
Yeah, that's probably.
What are some of the songs on the album, on the soundtrack where you
a lot of
use
them.
that technique?
You're asking for some specific recall right now, which I don't think my brain is capable of.
Fair enough.
But
it's
all
very
over the
fair
place. Like that's a technique I
situation.
do a lot. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Now, speaking of the soundtrack, on what is just your favorite song? Do you have one?
I think probably it's World 2. I actually had to go through the soundtrack this morning and be like, and pick a favorite child. How dare you make me do that?
Yeah. Sophie's choice over
But
here.
I think
it's like Space Heart is like, mommy,
You
pick
keep
me,
saying
right?
Space
Like,
Heart. I
no,
think Space Heart's
I'm so
your
sorry.
favorite, and that's cool.
Space Heart is my. Have I told
I've
you
heard-
that Space Heart is my favorite, and I mentioned it to absolutely everyone at
I've heard
every
that from a
individual
couple
opportunity.
people. Like, it's weird. Like, that was actually the fastest one to produce. Like, and because it's a lot less intense than the rest of the soundtrack. That's supposed to be the relaxing one. So it's really interesting to hear that that's what everyone's like favorite seems to be. I'm absolutely for it. Like, that's great. Like.
To be honest, I feel like I mean, this is maybe just like my weird musical taste. Like I have a very like metal side of my brain where, I'm listening to like Iron Maiden, right? Or like Rush or like Metallica or Megadeth or whatever. And then I have a like smooth jazz side of my brain that just wants to listen to very like chill music and I just want to like relax. And I don't think Space Heart is relaxing in that same way. I think Space Heart has a lot of energy. It's just like a very like upbeat. It's very chipper, It reminds me of like a little kid in the backyard, like playing pretend and just having the time of his life. It's like, what a great feeling. What a great emotion to get, to get out of a song.
I'm really glad
so
it
there
makes you
go.
feel
That's
like
why.
that.
That's why
Yeah,
love
I just
Space
wanted
Heart
that
so
to be
much.
sort of a respite between the more intense and heavy level music and boss music songs.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because, like, obviously, Relic Hunters is a game with a lot of high stakes and action, right? As you move through the gameplay, but at the end of the day, it is very like anchored by Jimmy and Pinky and their friends, and here's Panzer, and she's a little kid in a onesie. It's just like it is very.
It's a very playful game.
Upbeat,
Yeah.
colorful, playful, right?
They're
so
very
I think
playful
that
while
kind of
they're
a thing, that makes a lot of
going
sense.
down to the asteroid and killing a whole lot of things with guns, big guns.
Yeah, just like completely just like shredding. I mean, one of our like taglines for the game is Richard, shout out to Richard, one of our marketing guys. He just said when we were at like PAX East, he was like, I feel like the root of the game is like cute characters,
Yeah.
big guns. And it's just like, what a great way to describe Relic Hunters Zero, just like the universe in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the difference between those Asteroid Dungeon Nemesis tracks and this like the Space Heart track, but like from a gameplay perspective, moving through the level and you're shooting and there's grenades going off and there's a lot of like ambient sound effects that are kind of going on. Did that inform the way that you wrote those Asteroid Dungeon Nemesis songs at all?
Sorry for the pause. Oh my god, so much dead air. Honestly, I'm gonna have to say not so much. Like I did take note of what
cool.
any important like tonal sound effects and tried to make sure I wouldn't clash with those, but not as much as in a lot of games where I'm doing both the sound effects and the music, because I felt like most of the sound effects were pretty noise based, and they absolutely cut through on top of the music, like no matter what. Like there's a little bit of noise in the drums, but this is all very pitch centric music, so it's totally I don't think it really competes too much with the
Interesting.
with the sound effects. It is very busy, but like again, there's so much visual action that you can tie to the sound effects that I don't think they compete too much, or at least I hope they don't.
That actually that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like the main danger, right, in that sort of a situation is you're afraid that there will be something pitchy in the sound effects that will automatically be off key with whatever the music is, and that'll feel really dissonant.
That's never
right?
good.
But I don't think that there is too much of that with Relic Hunters. I guess there's like the gunshots are a little pitchy,
not as
but
a
not
defining
even that
feature,
much,
no.
right?
Like you've got some of the
But is that something that pops up in other titles
like,
that you work on?
Like, because when I design sounds, I think very tonally. I think of it as just another branch of the music. I sort of think of them as the same thing. So when I'm designing both sound effects and music for stuff, I design those together. So I make sure that they work together. And I design the music to react to the gameplay pitch elements.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. So for the folks at home, Kat has worked with us for a long time and has worked on a couple of other projects, some of which are unannounced, secrets, but some of which, you were the composer on Whispering Willows, right?
I'm not the composer on
It was
Whispering Willows. That is Steve Goldstein. I was the sound designer and general audio person on Whispering Willows. No worries.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I made that mistake.
I know Steve
I'm so
would
sorry,
kill me.
Steve, if you're
He's
listening.
a very vicious man.
My man
Steve, if you're listening, please don't kill me.
yeah, Steve, do not come for me in the night. Okay, so that's very cool. I knew you worked on
most of the projects
assumed,
that I am working on right now with Akupara are big NDA, which is always a fun part of being a game person, is like
big top secret. But you also do plenty of work outside of Akupara, right? Like something you mentioned on the blogs is writing sort of like melodic stuff for
I used to do
stuff,
a lot of casino stuff. That's how I paid off my student loans. So it was very very fortunate to get that job. It's an extremely tonal subset of game audio design. Like in that field, like the sound effects are a lot more important than the music, and you have to like make sure they add up to a full, like almost a song themselves, just dynamically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, like, in a certain sense, like, the goal is different, right? I feel like when it comes to, like, Relic Hunters Zero, someone's buying into that experience and they want the music to kind of, like, underlie the emotive nature, right? It's fast and it's energy-based because it's an action game where you're shooting guys or whatever. Whereas, like, at a slot machine, you're trying to attract attention and you're in a big room with a lot of other sounds, right? It's
you're attracting
it's a different context.
People with the sound effects, but like when they're actually engaged with the machine, you want to create an experience that kind of blurs their time spent on the machine. Because you want
that makes a lot of sense.
Anyway, I don't really do that anymore. I'm really glad to be focusing on indie games now.
Listen, you've graduated to bigger and better things with Relic Hunters. So, something that's kind of related to that is the melodic nature of the different songs of the remix soundtrack, right? Like there are really catchy, grabbable melodies. I could hum, the Space Heart melody, right, or the Duke and Commander melody off the top of my head because it's like earwormy in that way. That's an engineered thing on your end, right?
It's sort of related to that last point I said about casino music. Like some of the music is meant to be earwormy, but the trade-off sometimes with earwormy music is unless you're going to make it really loud, really long, that can emphasize its repetitiveness. So for the level music, I guess that's the royal we. I'm trying to make it like a little bit harder to grasp onto and almost more of like an environmental experience rather than something you can actually hum. But for the attract screen for the menu, you absolutely want that to slap you in the face with like a melody that's going to get stuck in your head.
Yeah, I mean, that Relic Hunters, it just pops right off immediately. So I definitely think that works. I also feel like, like that works because Relic Hunters is a little more kid-friendly of a game compared to some of our other, games. Is that something that, that you were thinking of, right? Like, I want to make something that kids
I wanted to
would
expose
be into.
tiny children to progressive rock early. I want to warp their brains.
Listen, I know that they're listening to this podcast. Little Timmy, listen, go find an album called 2112 and just put it on, wear the best headphones you can find.
Yeah, like
it's
prog rock
really
ruined
great,
my brain when I was a kid, and so I just wanted to pass that on to the new generation.
Yeah. Okay. So for some other ways that game music or music for like TV, right? Like I have friends who work in TV and movies, and they think a lot about leitmotifs. A leitmotif for the folks at home is a musical phrase that represents something diegetically in the story, right? So you might think of the Imperial March from Star Wars representing the Empire, if that makes sense. Is there anything like that in the Relic Hunters Zero soundtrack? Like, does Jimmy or like Pinky have a
Jimmy and
leitmotif?
Pinky don't. The only character who has like music that's really themed after them is Duke Dukin. But the main Relic Hunters theme does appear in a lot of modifications throughout the soundtrack. So like pay attention to the attract screen, to the main menu music, because you're going to hear little bits of that throughout all the rest of the songs.
That makes me feel like I am, I'm back in like chamber choir or whatever, and we're talking about like variations on a theme, but that's very cool because like that, in a lot of ways, that is kind of the leitmotif of like the Relic Hunters crew, I guess. It would be kind of hard to make like a Jimmy, a Pinky, an Ace leitmotif, just because like you can never guarantee that a character
exactly.
Is
we
didn't.
I mean, if we had if we were making a bigger soundtrack, like if they wanted to employ me all year making the soundtrack, then we could have had, different, music for each character. But I wanted it to be able to fit any character. And the way I did that is just make it more about the game itself and the vibe, a little bit about the environment. But as we said before, like there's not really different environments, but about the environment in general, rather than making it about any one character.
Right. But the one character that you kind of can guarantee, right, that folks will run into is the Duke and Commander at the end of, stage 4. Is it 4-4? Stage 4-3
You'll know when you get there.
I guess it's 4-4. You'll know when you get there. So the boss music is very boss music-y. And there's a part of me that wants to know, like, what are the things that set apart the kind of generic underlying the dungeon battle music versus this is a boss fight. You want this music to feel like a boss fight.
Yeah, this is the only music in the game that is not a strict loop. So most of the music is like one piece all the way through, then it loops back to the beginning. Very classic. But this music actually has a little bit of an intro, and that intro doesn't repeat, because there's about a 20-second period when you're going around picking up your goods, getting ready to fight him, and then the music really starts, and that's what loops. It's the most intense song on the soundtrack. It's a lot more inspired by metal. You gotta do metal for the boss. I didn't really have a third thing. I was really hoping that my brain would come up with one before I got to this point in the sentence.
It's okay. I believe
it's metal. That's what's important. That's how you make the boss music. You do the heavy riffs. I actually wrote that riff on a guitar at first, and then transferred it to.
Oh yeah, because you use a lot of guitar bass in other like in other aspects of your work, right? Okay. I remember we had talked about, or maybe I had
That was
read,
in the blog.
maybe that was in the blog too. I don't remember if we had talked about that like off the cast or in the blog. Okay, well, listen, I'm very good friends with Kat, everyone. That's what I want to establish here. All right, so we have a couple of minutes left. Have you, sat down to play through the game?
Since I put my soundtrack in it? Yes.
Yeah.
It hasn't been the most recent build, but once we got the soundtrack in it, I played through the whole game with my soundtrack in it, and that's always a really weird experience because you're like, this is a full video game. This is a real video game that I'm playing on an actual Switch where I play regular video games that I'm having fun with, but this one has my stuff in it.
Isn't that just the strangest feeling of all time? Do you get that feeling? Okay, so for instance, on this podcast later, I am going to be listening to these words, "Hi, future buddy." This is going to sound really weird to your ears, and you're going to think it's really gross and sound disgusting. Do you get that same kind of like impulse that or actors will talk about this, right? Where they can't watch their own movies because they just see, there's something about that, like watching yourself thing. Do you get that
yes,
with listening to your own
absolutely,
music?
I do. I need to give everything like some space after I finish it. That's why I can't answer a lot of these specific questions you're asking about the music. Like, can you give me a timestamp of where this leitmotif appears? I was like, I have not listened to this soundtrack for a month. My brain was entirely this soundtrack for like 4 months, and now it needs to breathe. The poor little brain.
Listen, this is not a puff piece interview, okay? This is hard-hitting journalism. I want
didn't
the
listen
facts,
to it for
okay?
like a month. So yes, I absolutely have a weird feeling about hearing my own music in games, and a lot of times, like if I finish the soundtrack pretty close to the release, like I have to just get the game later. I can't play it like right away. It's not gonna feel right.
Okay. Well, so when you do play Relic Hunters, who's your favorite? Do you have like a Relic Hunter of choice?
I'm torn between Raph, because she has a keytar, and that's obviously the best, and Ace, because I always like to play the animal characters in the thing if there's like humans and animals. So he's a donkey, and that's cool. Yeah. And I just like his vibe. Like, you talk to him a lot more than the rest of the characters, so I feel like you get a lot more of an impression of his personality. Like,
You definitely do. No, listen, for Ace, okay, so we're at PAX East, and we're like demoing the Switch port with the couch co-op, which is a big feature, right? We want people to be able to sit down on a couch together and play Relic Hunters. And one of the things we were doing, we're just pulling people in for a 10-minute demo. We got a lot of like dads and kids or whatever. And Ace must have been the most popular character that we tried so hard to get people not to pick, because in case you don't know, listeners, Ace is very bad. He's almost a joke character, right? You earn more money on Ace, but he has no proficiency with any of the weapons, so his accuracy is completely shot. He deals less damage with like everything overall. It's like very hard mode. And so people would sit down and you'd give them this little spiel, right? You'd be like, oh, Jimmy is the all-arounder. Pinky does melee. Raph has the keytar, which will shoot through walls. And then you get to Ace and you'll just be like, Ace is a joke character. Don't play Ace. And then they immediately lock in Ace. And I'm just like, what is it about Ace that attracts all of you to this donkey man
I
with
think
his
I think
helmet?
it's because he really knows how to avoid responsibility. Like, when you talk to him throughout the game, like, it's really clear he knows how to make it clear, like, oh yeah, I totally would have been here, if I wasn't like doing more important things. And I really like that in a man.
I also very much appreciate that. That is what we call #BigMood. Okay, so we're coming up on time, but I did want to end on a very cool thing. And by a cool thing, I mean, I hope this is a cool thing. What's something cool about the soundtrack that you'd want to highlight for folks that like they might not otherwise notice? Like, are there any like secret gems hiding in the music that people
If
would
you
really,
play Space Heart
into?
backwards, it'll summon Satan. That's pretty cool.
How did you do that? That's really tricky. I mean, to compose a whole summoning song backwards,
nicely,
right?
And he's like, sure, dude. But I mean, for serious, like, I guess the coolest thing, the thing that I think is really cool about this soundtrack, and I've kind of like said this throughout the interview, is like I got to use like a lot of cool asymmetrical meters, and I don't know if that's going to make sense to like non-music people, but there's a lot of weird meter stuff going on in this, and that's something I've wanted to put in a game for a while that I haven't had like a great opportunity to, like a lot of time.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So meter is rhythm, right? It's timing stuff, right? So a typical song will just like, a pop song on the radio will be in like 4/4 a lot of the time, right? But in this, it feels like a lot of stuff swaps between
there's a lot of 4/4 as well, like, especially when you're trying to be like accessible, especially the first song, like that's mostly in 4/4, but it does have some other stuff in there. There's a lot of 7/8. That's
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel
favorite
like
meter.
7/8. The problem is that I haven't done music stuff for a really long time, so I'm trying to strut. I'm trying to front, and I'm getting called out by my own brain's lack of ability to articulate. I was sitting there like, if it's 4/4 and then 7/8, does that mean the 4/4 becomes 8/8? Is that how it works? I don't think that's how it works,
No,
buddy.
you kind of just change the
theory.
drum
Go
part
back
so
to
that
college,
it makes
please.
sense. I don't know if that's an extremely generic way to put it, but yeah, it's just got a lot of weird spicy meters, and I'm very glad I got to put that in the game. Really glad the team was open to that, and like actually really liked it, because with the first few songs that I made were actually a lot tamer, and the things they actually responded to were the more experimental ones, were the spicier ones, were the more progressive ones. So I'm like, all right, if that's what you want, I could do that.
That's how you get spicy music, folks at home. You switch up the meters a whole bunch. Get some 7/8, get some 6/8 in there. Just it's like chili powder.
I love that shit.
Okay, so it has been great talking with you, Kat. I really appreciate you coming on the inaugural episode of our amazing podcast. Where can the folks at home find you, find your music, listen to all the great stuff that you've made?
Okay, so I am on Spotify as Kat Arthur. I've got a couple soundtracks up there. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Sound Kitties. That's sound like things that make noise, and kitties like the adorable little things that aren't puppies. Sound Kitties at Twitter. Yeah.
I kind of can't believe you have that handle. Anytime I see somebody with a handle like, something, it's just what a great, easy, simple Twitter handle. If you folks at home would like to follow me, you can follow at ThatBuddySola on Twitter. You can also get in touch with Akupara Games by going to twitter.com/Akupara Games, facebook.com/Akupara Games, and instagram.com/Akupara Games. Finally, if you'd like to join the Discord where you can hang out with me, with Kat, with all of the other staff members that make Akupara great, you can go to discord.gg/Akupara Games. Kat,
Thank you, buddy.
so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fantastic. This was a lot of fun.